to be part of the committee and for joining us here today. So we have, I'll call the meeting to order, and then we have to be sworn in.
Correct.
So let's do that. How do you want to do that?
Robin is our county clerk. She's gonna swear everybody in.
I am. I'm going to share my screen. So the oath is on the screen for everyone to read. And I think you can just all do it together as a group, similar to the Pledge of Allegiance. And I know everyone's here in the room, so.
Can the people online hear us well? Can you guys hear us?
Everyone's here? All right, we can start. I.
For all consistent Constitution of the United States and of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, laws, regulations, council, and the regulations of municipal council.
All right, you did great. Thank you all. I'll send you all your certificates following the meeting. Yes.
Well, great. So we're all sworn in now, so I think we want to briefly discuss at the outset sort of the mission and the organization of the committee. So the county has put together a brief statement, and I do think it's worth going through. So the mission statement, the ARPA Advisory Committee's mission is to advise the Barnstable County Board of Commissioners and Assembly of Delegates on regional funding priorities and to recommend criteria to identify projects of regional impact for funding. So the county has, will receive 42 million total in ARPA funds. They have 21 currently and expect the second tranche in June. There's also a value statement here I think is worth reviewing. So the ARPA Advisory Committee will carry out its work in accordance with the following values. Regionalism. The committee's frame of reference shall be Barnstable County as a region and, as appropriate, 4 sub-regions, the upper, middle, lower, and outer Cape. Process will be data informed and evidence based. The committee's activities and resulting recommendations shall be driven by data, analyses, and evidence developed to identify priorities and projects with regional impact. Equity. The committee shall include in its recommendations criteria for ensuring that regional ARPA funding addresses the needs of vulnerable populations and populations disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Transparency. Meetings of the full committee will be conducted in accordance with the open meeting law. And then conflict of interest. Voting members and agencies affiliated with which they may be affiliated with will not benefit directly or indirectly from funding recommendations. And then finally, the expected deliverables of the committee. The ARPA Advisory Committee will provide recommendations to the Board of Commissioners on 1, priorities for regional projects and expenditure of county ARPA funds. 2, criteria and process for establishing ARPA funding priorities. 3, identification of types of subrecipients eligible to apply. The committee will engage regional stakeholders to identify and describe potential projects of regional benefit for investment using county ARPA funds. To inform this process, the committee will collate and summarize other potential sources of funding for county regional priorities, including 1, COVID-related federal and state funding that's been received by governmental, nonprofit, or for-profit entities in Barnstable County via federal programs to remediate the effects of the pandemic. 2, pending funding from state ARPA appropriations. 3, pending funding from federal sources, Infrastructure Investment Act and the Jobs Act, other potential legislation to support child care, workforce, and other priorities. The County Board of Commissioners will appoint and has appointed us a 7 to 9 member committee. Committee members will include persons with established record of regional leadership and planning with regard to the funding priorities set forth within the ARPA legislation. The committee will not be deciding upon applications for funding. The committee will require, it says here up to 7 months. I don't think we'll need that long to complete its work and provide recommendations to the Board of Commissioners, and will require staffing, administrative, and research support from the county. These costs are included in the Board of Commissioners ARPA and administrative budget. So this is a document that the commissioners voted, and this will guide us through the process that we are currently engaged in. So I think now for an overview of the American Rescue Plan Act, Beth, Al,
Quick overview. First of all,
Dan.
Just for clarification, what do they mean by agencies and what do they mean by affiliated? In the content, because it says will not, voting members will not, with agencies, so for example, if we were to talk about housing and I was on the board of HAC, I couldn't be on this committee, or I would recuse myself from a vote. Because this is incredibly restrictive, you realize that?
that wouldn't
Right.
really get.
Okay,
I
so
had the same
could I
question.
just interject? If Dorothy Savarese, for example, were involved with the Cape Cod Climate Change Collaborative, that means that she couldn't be on the committee if we were going to do anything relative to climate change here, resiliency or.
Yeah, I don't think that was the intent, but I do think we need a clarification on the language.
Definitely do.
Because the intent was to have subject matter experts and people that are engaged in some of the challenges we have around the table. So we'll ask for clarification on that. But that was not the intent.
So the question would be a definition of agencies and what the affiliation is. And like in prior lives, what we would do in a case like that is simply recuse ourselves. So there is the whole ethics thing of informing and recusing. So it is important that we let people know that we're affiliated in some way with an agency that may have an interest.
Yeah.
And that we recuse ourselves from a vote. That's very different from what this says, just so we're clear on it.
Yeah.
So I just swore in myself to something that I may not be able to do. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't even, I mean, that's a real issue, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't think that was the intent. So, but today is sort of the meeting where we can discuss those things, right? It's organizational. So what are going to be the parameters of our discussions moving forward? I think that's an important point to clarify. It certainly was not the intent, as I understand it, the commissioners in doing that. So we'll ask for a clarification from them, which we'll have before our next meeting.
So there, just not to belabor it, but there's a personal benefit that obviously needs to be off the table.
Right.
Whether there's by an affiliation to a nonprofit, for example, the question is what is benefit? But really, the agency and affiliation needs to be defined in such a way that we can do this.
Noted.
Otherwise,
And Dan, if I may, you asked for two things, and one of them was, what does affiliation mean? So one could stretch this a little bit and say that, I'm affiliated with virtually every nonprofit on Cape Cod because we have, provided funding to hundreds of nonprofit organizations involved in every area of regional impact in the area. So again, maybe that means I can't serve, but I think the definition of affiliate is important, and so that too we can have clarity if it is determined to be more in line with other conflict of interest situations where it's disclose and recuse, then we'll be sure that we're being comprehensive in terms of what we're disclosing and what we're recusing ourselves on.
Yeah. So I would agree. I don't think affiliate should be the word. Affiliate should be the word they use. We'll get a definition of that. I do think disclosure is an important piece going forward. But I don't think it would be an impediment because I think almost everyone around the table would then be disqualified.
Yes.
Certainly.
Yeah.
We'll clarify and improve the language.
Not only would we be disqualified, but the only people that you would get to serve are people who you wouldn't want to serve because they have no affiliation with anything.
Right.
You need those subject matter experts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yes, thank you.
thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, I was gonna say thank you for being here, and, on this committee that, we hope to wrap up by the end of June
Yes.
and have recommendations. So I just wanted to kind of provide a little bit of really quick background on ARPA, and the funds that the county received. So the funds that the county received were part of the Corona State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds that came out of ARPA. So the Treasury released the ARPA funds on, can people see this? I guess if they're.
Do you want me to share that PowerPoint?
Yeah, thank you.
Wasn't sure that was doing right.
Did you want to direct with your screen?
No, I'm just gonna read it off of mine. I think it's just easier. Yeah, there are copies here if anybody would like. So, Karen, what do you need? I'm just filling here. Thank you. All right. So the Treasury released the ARPA guidance. On there. So the Treasury released the ARPA final rule and guidance on January 6th. So it was, the funding came out in the spring, but the Treasury just released the final rule in January. ARPA funds can be used to cover costs incurred from March 3rd, 2021 forward. And all the funds need to be obligated by December 31st of 2024. And then we have an additional 2-year period of performance. So if we obligate the funds before December 31st, the applicants will have an additional 2 years to use the grant funds. So the Treasury gave Barnstable County 41.37 million. We received half of that, as Paul said, in May of 2021, and those are the figures. We expect to receive the other half in June of 2022.
Just one clarification, that this, twice that much came to the region, but half of it is going to the towns, right?
So, yep, so no, this is what the county received.
The next
The
slide.
41.3, and the next slide
Okay.
it talks about the 15 towns also received US Treasury funds directly. And this gives you the breakdown. So the towns themselves received over 26 million in addition to the 41 received. They're having to follow the same rules and regulations that the Treasury set forth as we are in making their decisions.
Was the county distribution based on anything?
They did base it on population, which is, yeah, they did base it on population. So, I mean, we're obviously a little different, in that our county, our regional government provides regional services, and in other parts of the country, counties, provide services. And so this hasn't been a huge issue in other parts of the country, like it is in Massachusetts, where we don't have active county government, except for the 5 or 6 that are currently functioning. Of those 5 or 6, Barnstable County really is unique, in that we do provide the regional services. We've been working with Bristol, Plymouth, and Norfolk counties on some, we'll talk about that later, on the ARPA portal, et cetera, et cetera. So we are working really closely with the 3 of other counties that receive county funds. They're distributing yours a little bit differently, and that they're directly going to their towns. But that's because as counties, they don't provide the same type of services that Barnstable County provides.
So can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So it's fair to say if we didn't have Barnstable County government, we wouldn't have these extra funds coming?
No, well, if you're in Massachusetts, if you don't have an active county government or a county government that's still functioning, the funds went directly to the towns. And so that's been some of the consternation, I think, from the towns. But if they look at other areas of the state, they're like, well, it just went directly to the towns. It didn't go through the county. So,
Yeah, and those other counties in Mass received funds that they're flowing down to the towns. The towns received additional funds like our
Yeah.
towns did.
yes,
And they're using a population-based distribution.
Yes.
they are, yep. The counties that we're working with are all using a population distribution. Just, again, kind of really high level, big picture. So ARPA, has buckets of eligible funds, investments in water, sewer, broadband, infrastructure. The funding really is intended to bolster and improve the public health system, and anything that had to do with the COVID response. Also addressing the negative economic impacts of COVID on household, businesses, nonprofits. And there's a special lens that we're going to be looking through about the disproportionately impacted communities. That's supposed to be really an underlying theme of the ARPA funds. How do we address the negative economic impact on COVID, but also with this extra lens of the disproportionate impacted communities, considering, our seniors, people of color, single, female head of households, et cetera. And then the fourth big bucket is replacing lost public sector revenue and providing premium pay to employees that provided essential work. So the commissioners, the county commissioners, back in, I guess it was November 10th, actually prioritized these in this order. So when they made that decision, their thinking was, given the issues that we have on the Cape that we're well aware of, they wanted the funds to be spent on, water, sewer, broadband, infrastructure, bolstering up our public health system, addressing the negative economic impacts. Not so much, they weren't so much concerned with lost public sector revenue and providing premium pay. So they'd like us to prioritize our work in those areas. You guys know who you are, I don't need to say that. In addition, I just wanted to kind of mention, so we're here to provide, consultation and advice and support to this committee. So myself and Vera, Christy, and I think you have some staff members who will be providing support as needed. In addition, we are looking to hire up an ARPA grant manager. We haven't done that because of the difficulties the impasse that we've been at between the Assembly of Delegates and the county commissioners, and not being able to move forward. We just haven't hired anyone because it remains to be seen the skill sets we're going to need for that grant manager. We had been involved in trying to hire someone, I don't know, Chrissy, was it almost a year ago? It seems like, right? Last spring. We weren't successful, so we put that on hold. So Vera and I've been acting, Vera has been spending about 50% of her time on this, and I've been providing quite a bit of staff time as well. So that will continue till we get somebody hired. We also just hired a consultant, Civilytics. How do you say it? Civilytics Consulting, that's going to be working with this group to do some of the mapping that we're going to talk about in a little bit. One of the things that I think is really important for this group, and I know it's going to be important for the work going forward, as well as all of our elected officials, is really mapping out the different sources of federal and state funds that are either pending, have come to the region, could be used in addition to ARPA or instead of ARPA, so that we really have a good picture of the landscape. We'll be talking more about that.
So can I interrupt? So you are going to have a map of what we've already had come in, what it's been spent on.
I think looking at that big
I'm just
picture.
thinking back to the reopening task force, when funds were flowing from Boston to buy PPEs for shelters. And that stuff too.
I'll share the scope of services for the consultant with you all. That will help. But yes, the request has been, we want to be able to see this by 10.
You already did the mission statement and value statement. So, the process is that, the committee won't be deciding on applications for funding, which is, I think there's some of this language probably got a little, we need to clean that up. That was not the original, when we originally conceived of the advisory group, the role was different. It was broader. It was making recommendations on particular applications for funding. That's no longer the case. Things have evolved over the last several months, and that the advisory committee's role is different than what we originally envisioned it to be. I think I can stop there. well, you already went over this, so. Yep, I'm gonna stop there, just kind of to give you a big overview of the program, of the funding that's come to the region, for ARPA. And, where we're at.
Great. So next on the agenda, I mean, the county has done a lot of work on that survey out there. So I think Vera is going to give us an overview of the survey results. Sure.
When I stop sharing my screen, the, virtual meetings didn't come back up, so I might need a little technical assistance.
The what?
The other.
The other people.
And
Stop.
may I just ask, are we going to get copies of the materials that we're reviewing today, or should we continue to take notes?
Certainly, certainly.
Thank you. And I know Robin sent out, like the mission and the values and the agenda and the oath of office, and things like that. But if there's any additional stuff, it would be great if we could get that.
Certainly.
Thank you.
We have the presentation, Dorothy.
I'm gonna forward it to you right now, Dorothy. And who else is on the phone?
Sean.
Can I ask a question before I go on?
And Kristen O'Malley.
Sure.
I can share my screen. Yeah, I can share my screen. Why don't I do that?
Oh, I was invited.
So Dorothy, I just sent it to you and Kristen and Sean.
Thanks so much. Appreciate that.
Certainly.
There we go. Well, I'm sharing my screen now. Okay.
Everybody, hi.
There we go.
So shall I go?
I
Yes.
think we're good.
Okay.
You all
I'm
signed.
trying to get it to full screen here. Sorry.
No problem.
Don't go far.
Yeah.
I won't.
So, Mr. Chairman, just to be clear while we're doing this, they've already decided the priorities. We're not looking at grants that are submitted.
They're open to
The
more
pri-
information on the priority.
Yeah, the priorities have been suggested, but they were suggested early on, and there's sort of components of the ARPA legislation out there too, but there are a lot more things to consider.
Okay. all right.
So what we're going to hear today is survey results from Vera. And Chrissy's going to give us an overview of regional challenges and regional priorities that are outlined in the regional policy plan and the comprehensive economic development survey.
And so I've got I'll drive it from here, okay? Senator Wolf, it's a great question because they articulate the priorities based on knowledge at the time under the interim final rule that was available from the Treasury in early November. And since that time, at that same meeting, they directed us to engage in a community engagement process and get feedback from community participants as well as stakeholders and the towns. And so that has informed, that process really informed our recommendation, Beth and my recommendation, to impanel a group like this to provide further refinement for the regional thinking here. And so that engagement process, and again, here's just a summary of the priorities as they established them in early November. And as we'll see here, housing, we see it sort of buried there in the third priority, and that's basically how the Treasury has published them. That's how they kind of fell. But in the results, I'm going to bury the lead here. In the results of the survey, it's almost, there's near unanimity that infrastructure and housing are vying for one another as the two top priorities. And so this slide will ultimately be refined based on what you all recommend and what the commissioners then ultimately adopt. So this is identical to the slide that Beth just showed you in terms of the preliminary priorities established by the commissioners. And so I'll take us through this without much, because I'm a methods person, I won't belabor that with you, but suffice it to say, we had very good response. We had a community survey that was relatively brief, but pithy in the types of questions that we asked people. We asked people what they thought of regional priorities, which regional priorities how would they rank regional priorities as under ARPA? And we had an excellent response rate. We had well over 5,800 responses from individual citizens, nearly half of whom actually went in and typed comments as well. So there's thousands of comments of people, and some of them are very articulate and impassioned in what they said about this. There was a lot of concern and caring put into people's responses. I will say here, it's important that as I've gone around and I've given this presentation multiple times, to actually at all 15 town meetings that we, not meetings, but the engagement we had with the town leadership, gave the same presentation and the same information. And many people who are also empirical people will say, oh, well, it wasn't a statistically drawn sample and so on. To which I would respond to them, neither are the people who stand up at an open meeting, state their name and their address and their piece and make their case in an open forum, right? So this is basically a virtual and analogous process to that. And it would be a red letter day in the newspapers if 5,849 people stood up and did that. And, and I have this by town, how many people, responded. It's actually quite extraordinary. We had, in order to make sure that people who weren't comfortable doing this online could call in and give us a response or respond by email. And so these are the responses. The overwhelming majority, we have more than 6,000 respondents, overwhelming majority of which were through the online survey. The online survey was distributed in English, Portuguese, and Spanish as well. And we had to make extra efforts to get the non-English speaking respondents, aware of the survey and its import. And we did so through local stakeholders and responsive. And so I have those subgroups as well, because one of the mandates in this is this to make sure to look at disproportionately impacted communities. So we're going to make sure these people are represented to the extent possible. Stakeholder feedback was great, but also the quality of the thinking and the level of detail that people wrote in with and some ideas and whatnot made it obvious that there was more regional discussion that needed to be had. And that was what we're doing here is a direct result of that. There's just more on the outreach. That's the picture of the online portal. Here's the responses by town. And even the smallest of towns, for 112 people responded. These are the ages. The age skewed old, as done many things when sort of in the public realm on Cape Cod. Median age on Cape Cod is about 54-ish. But several thousands of responses, hundreds by town. So this is not invalid from a point of view of constituent feedback for elected officials, I would submit. More female than male. Some prefer not to say. This is the racial breakdown. Obviously, we know Cape Cod is predominantly white, well north of 90%. So were the respondents, but we did not have a proportionate representation from the other sub-ethnic or racial groups. I added Brazilian in there because many people responded, enough people responded with Brazilian to make it interesting, I thought. Isn't sort of skewing things in any particular way, but I wanted to try and reflect as much as possible some of the subdiversity that we saw among the respondents. As a result of our particular outreach efforts, we got over 200 people who self-identified as Hispanic or Latino in the responses. And the reason I set it out here in this fashion is because some of the responses and the weighting of their priorities across the various investment opportunities within ARPA are different by ethnic breakdown. Not hugely so, but interestingly so. Again, okay, so across all 5,800 respondents, this is everybody, not broken down by race. Reading down your left is the type of ARPA investments that could be made, and then people's relative interest and ranking of those in terms of importance. And we asked them, you could say, I don't know, or not important right now, important, or should be the table, more of the sort of the table pounding level of importance. And as you see here, and I've just got it color coded. The top priority is in green, and this will carry forth across the next few slides. Infrastructure was the priority, and affordable, a slightly distant second, affordable housing. This is across everyone. Well, importantly, I did not have a socioeconomic question in here. So I can't segment this by people who are already housed and attained housing, you know, implied by their economic status versus not. But so this is what we do have. So the top four across all of them with different shuffling within them is infrastructure, public health, affordable housing, and childcare, early education, childcare. Revenue replacement is ran a dismal sixth across every calculus here. As premium pay a little more so, but no one was really excited about revenue replacement
Don't,
for the towns. Beg your pardon?
don't take it personally.
Certainly don't. And so now these are the same responses by town. So if you were interested in the what we pass out has this information by town, because of course any elected that's going to be looking at this is going to say, well, how did my town respond? In other words, how is what I'm saying going to match with
Sean
these?
has a question.
Yes, go ahead, Sean. Sorry, you're muted.
Sorry, I did have a question. I was preparing to wait for you to finish because you may answer it, but my question, and you may get to this, is there any sort of specific breakdown about what types of infrastructure?
No, not at this level. Good question. No, we didn't ask them water. We didn't ask them more money for septics or sewering or wastewater plants. No, but that would be wonderful to some, the sort of quality and content to come out of a group like this. Other questions?
Was there a definition of public health?
The question is, was there a definition of public health? It was slightly defined in the, on the survey. It's that sort of vaccination, contact tracing, that sort of thing. Yeah, and public health supports.
But not environmental issues.
Not environmental issues, correct. Yeah, more public healthy, more COVID-y than public health writ large.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Good question. Other questions? So this is the info by town. So, the Outer Cape, some of the Outer Cape towns actually prioritize housing higher than infrastructure.
All of them.
Is it all of them? Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, all of them. Very interesting. So this brings what I presented the information this way to allow some of the potential sub-regional conversations to happen in this regard. Here is by race ethnicity. The first series of, again, the types of ARPA investment possible. The priorities for people self-defining as Hispanic or Latino revenue. Do you have the lobby? Okay. They prioritize both affordable housing, Hispanic, Latino, and people responding as Black or African American, non-Hispanic, both prioritized housing instead of infrastructure, and the other four priorities stored. You can understand. So that we are seeing. I would suggest it implies a strong socioeconomic factor there. All right, so I'm trying to move as quickly as possible. We also then asked, all right, so with regard to this $41 million of funding, do you think that the county should allocate funds regionally to the 15 towns based on population, or a combination? The overwhelming response was combination. And I think it's natural. It's sort of natural. If you kind of don't really know, you're not in the details, right? People were like, oh, well, maybe a little of both. Okay. But it really was, a pronounced response to a combination. And in the survey, Karen, to your question again, we did take some time in there to provide a fair amount of information and content that would help educate the respondent a little bit. This is how the responses to that same question, regional money only, town money only, or a combination, went by town. And so even towns, large towns that would have it acknowledged, would be sort of on the losing side of the ledger from ARPA allocation point of view, if they weren't just getting all the money by town. Even those towns, the larger towns like Barnstable and Yarmouth and Falmouth, the respondents, the residents in these towns responded that yes, with an implied explicit prioritization or openness to regionalism and investment in regional projects, even at the expense potentially of their town's coffers. We also asked then, all right, so if you're, for the money that's going to be allocated to the towns, regardless, and that's been the recent, the backing and forth thing, is going to be 10 million to the towns, it's going to be 20 million to the towns. Regardless of that amount, how do you think these funds should be apportioned among the towns? Use a town population only, which is in fact the metric that's being used pretty much everywhere else. It's sort of the least controversial. Or do we take a more equitable approach to this? Takes a little more thought and oomph to do it. Do we set? We propose to suggest maybe a base amount for each town, to set a base so that Truro is not getting $4. They're getting a sizable amount. A base for each amount for each town of however we decide what that base is, and then the remainder allocated by population seemed a fair way to approach it. Others on the assembly have an allocation approach that they've put forward. Don't have any comment there, but some form of allocation method. How do you propose? What do you prefer to see? Very few people, 1 in 5, only 1 in 5 said just allocated by town population. So there is an interest in a more equitable distribution that does not just track to towns' year-round population. And this is have the same answer to that question by town. Here you can, as you can imagine, the smaller towns are much more emphatically involved, interested in the more equitable approach. The larger towns you're still over the line, past 50% for an equity-based allocation method, but much closer to 50%. So as a result of this process, we also met with town officials. Now, town official meetings, Beth and I sat with all 15 of them and invited to the meetings where the head of the Board of Selectmen and whoever they wanted to invite, the town manager or the town administrator, finance director. So those usual suspects that you would imagine. And and their assembly delegate, their delegate to the assembly. And so nearly all of them participated, that cohort for each town participated. And they were very robust, sometimes testy, but robust exchange of views, shall we say, on these subjects. The towns, many of the larger towns say, look, we have projects in the hopper, we're ready to spend. We would prefer to see all of the funds that the county has received passed through, in fact, effectively passed through to the towns. Other towns, 6 of 9 of the towns were interested in regional projects, and some of those were large towns. All had stated priority for affordable and attainable housing, clean water, wastewater management infrastructure. Yes.
So were those individual meetings with individual towns?
Yes, they were.
Quick question of when were those meetings? February, March this year?
February of this year. February, yeah. February. Some of them were in January. Were they in January? Oh, sorry, the period ended, the engagement period ended February 11th. So they were mostly in January. The last couple were in early February. Yeah. Yeah. So these are relative, so by your extra feels like it's relatively recent.
Yeah.
Yes. 9 towns stated the funds should be allocated to the towns only. 6 towns representing 38% of the population recommended allocation to the towns naturally, but also indicated support for regional projects. Larger towns wanted the population-based allocation, and smaller towns wanted an equitable base plus or whatever else comes out of that process. The stakeholder engagement was, as I said earlier, was rich. We received many responses. We will make sure that all of these letters that we received are provided to your committee in the form and with the cadence that you think would be most beneficial. Print them out. I'll print them all out for you. But again, it gave rise to the recommendation by Beth that there's further engagement with these stakeholders, many of whom have thoughtful ideas on regional projects. An additional scan is needed.
One other question, sorry.
Yes.
Was there any indication that the towns were meeting with each other about ARPA funding or?
It's not a question we asked specifically. I can imagine that. Oh, well, the town select board, the town association. and they meet once a month.
Okay.
The leadership of the towns and the select boards have monthly meetings, and we've presented at both of those
Okay,
recently. But I don't know about, towns sitting down with towns and, hey,
like sub-regional.
not sure, not sure. This is all the stakeholders who engaged with us. I'm just gonna go through them here, but, many of the people that we would want to hear from in this regard. And so, the policy gave rise to policy recommendations. Both these two have been slowed down by the impasse, but remain in training. And to extend the stakeholder engagement period and impanel this group. Wendy, did you have another question?
No, I'm looking at your stakeholders contacted list,
Yeah,
and number 10 is the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce, which you identify as Barnstable, but it should be Cape-wide.
exactly.
Cape
Thank
Cod
you.
Climate change has a Cape-wide.
Your eagle eye has picked out one of many errors in here, I'm sure. I appreciate it. Thank you. You're right, of course, because I know, I'm looking straight at it. I said Cape Wide for the Climate Collaborative. Sorry about that.
Council of Churches also.
Okay, thank you.
CCYP, just
So yes, edits, comments, welcome.
great.
And then policy recommendation to impanel this group here as we stand. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Vera. That was a great overview, a great starting point. But just to remind the committee, our focus is our regional projects, not how much should go to the towns
Right.
or what formula it should be distributed by. So having said that, we're going to move on to Christy right now, who is going to give us an overview of regional priorities, identify the regional policy plan, the comprehensive economic development plan.
Do you have that slide deck you could pull back up? Great. So while she's getting that ready, I was asked to talk a little bit about some of the priorities that are contained within the regional policy plan, as well as the comprehensive economic development strategy. And kind of giving some thought to the regional priorities, which I've actually discussed in some length and some detail with both the county commissioners and the Assembly of Delegates over the course of the last several months. Really wanted to start by kind of talking about the key challenges that the region faces to kind of start framing the discussion. Obviously, you're going to need to look at the ARPA priorities, but looking at some of the key challenges that we're facing, I think is one of the most important places to start. And so this is actually a series of key challenges that are taken from the regional policy plan. There are others, but these are kind of the key ones I thought might make the most sense to focus on. And, starting with housing, which of course has been identified as one of the priorities for the region. And while the housing issue is probably a regional issue and a national issue, it's even more unique to the Cape. So the Cape has a lot of challenges related to housing, including that 37% of our housing stock are second homes. 83% of our housing stock is single family homes. So lacking in diversity and certainly affordability, we know is an issue. When we look at long-term economic sustainability and stability of our region, we, I quote Wendy here, our environment is our economy, and making sure that we protect our natural resources is equally important. But looking at our local businesses, our nonprofit organizations, looking at the long-term economic stability of our region is one of those important key challenges that we face as a region, which is tied very closely to infrastructure development. So we need to make sure that we can accommodate all of those that want to live, work, and play here in the region. And looking at wastewater, water, sewer, broadband development, and certainly our transportation networks as well. Fresh and coastal water quality, I probably should have started with that one. That one's probably the most critical of our key challenges here. So we know we've got 2/3 of our coastal embayments are impacted by nitrogen. We've recently completed a pond and lake atlas update, and so we know that we've got significant impacts to our freshwater quality as well. And then climate change and coastal resiliency certainly this is a key challenge facing most of the world, but we kind of sit in a little bit of a unique position here as a coastal community. And we know we're facing some significant economic impacts from climate change and coastal resiliency, and that kind of impacts all of the other 4 issue areas at the same time. So if we can just move to the next slide here, just the covers the regional policy plan and the economic development strategy. These were both updated in 2018, went into effect in 2019, the regional policy plan. the regional policy plan really has this overarching framework for a lot of the growth and development, certainly the policy, growth and development policy for the region. And while it was difficult to do the two plans simultaneously, it actually gave us a framework for goal alignment. So a lot of what's contained in these plans now actually permeates through the rest of our planning projects. So it also is aligned now with our 208 area-wide water quality management plan, our new climate action plan, as well as a variety of others, including our regional transportation plan. So, and just to go into a little bit of detail, I'm not going to read everything on this slide, but really just identifying that the regional policy plan and the economic development strategy have already gone through a very robust public process. So they've included many, many stakeholder meetings with town officials, with different boards, sub-regional public hearings where we've had hundreds of stakeholders engaged in the process representing a variety of sectors. They've been broad, inclusive, transparent public processes. So the development of these key challenges and then the development of the strategies and actions as we move forward have really gone through a significant vetting process already. And so if we move on to the next slide here, really this is the regional policy plan priority project kind of action steps. And so it's broken into systems, natural, built, and community, just like the regional policy plan, water quality protection and planning, and certainly looking at fresh water quality data are really key components of looking at our natural systems, regional capital planning, which of course includes most of our infrastructure, including water, wastewater, sewer, broadband, and transportation, of course, climate resiliency planning. And then under community systems, the one that we're focusing on is, of course, developing a regional housing plan. And so that's something that is really one of the most important steps moving forward. And so in a you know, kind of following on some of these recommended actions, we also want to make sure that we have the ability to measure performance over time. So again, broken into these systems, but you'll see that many of these performance measures track some of those actions, which we can also use to help guide some of the decisions that this committee potentially could make. So looking at development in our activity centers, is it compacted? Is it walkable? Are we contributing to climate change? Looking at high wage jobs, looking at housing diversity. And so the next slide really just kind of takes a look.
Excuse me, Christy, you've got walking sidewalk network, but I assume that has bike too, like a bike ped network?
It does. So multimodal is certainly a big component of that sidewalk network. Well, it's the person in the icon. We always look at multimodal networks.
And that goes with the complete streets too.
Right. Yeah. And so switching gears a little bit to the economic development strategy, again, we really kind of developed with the robust stakeholder process here. Many stakeholders, many sectors engaged. So looking at a lot of the different economic sectors, representing a variety of different areas within the community, looking at social services, education, really agreeing on some of these regional objectives. The economic development strategy is really developed in conjunction with the Barnstable County Economic Development Council. And that's also a plan that's approved not only through the commission, but through the Federal Economic Development Administration as well. So here is a list of some of the priorities and initiatives that are contained within that SEDS action plan. So looking at comprehensive activity center and planning, housing diversity and affordability. Here's an opportunity to take a more close look at the blue economy sector development, climate change innovation. There's opportunities for us to be unique as a region in addressing our climate change challenges. Local business development is one of the key ones that's contained in the action plan. And this not only looks at local business development, but really also looks at workforce, which also looks at childcare. So certainly a lot of different opportunities in there. Infrastructure development, and of course, funding to support that. Last mile broadband financing strategy. So certainly there's a lot that we need to go into that to look at our communities. And education and workforce development to support wage growth. So really looking at some of our potential labor issues. So kind of taking a look at the categories broadly, we've been sort of using some of these as a framework to move forward: water quality, housing, broadband, and economic development. And the climate change and coastal resiliency piece really kind of runs horizontally through many of these. But this is kind of a place where it may be a good opportunity to start. And so under water quality, if we move to the next slide, we can see that not only the 208 plan, the regional policy plan, the economic development strategy, all really pointing to the need for a dedicated freshwater planning process. We've recently completed our Ponds and Lakes Atlas update, and so that really just identifies the need for freshwater initiative. Many of our impairments in our freshwater bodies need immediate attention. Also looking at other opportunities for wastewater expansion, looking at our septic loan program, certainly opportunities that have been identified in other planning documents that could potentially fit into the framework of this. Then if we move to the next slide and get into housing, again, the regional policy plan and the economic development strategy have really identified the need for a regional housing strategy. And of course, housing unit creation, unit development. We know COVID has had a significant impact on our housing market. So the median sales price in January of 2019 was just under 400,000. That snapshot in January of 2022, or over $650,000 for median sales price for a home on the Cape. And at the same time, we've seen that significant decline in the number of available housing units, going from just about 1,700 during that same time frame to 231 units as of January of 2022.
Was that because of construction permits were down?
I think it's a variety of reasons, and certainly we saw many new homeowners coming to the region. So, and you know, we've also just recently issued a survey of our new homeowners to get a sense of some of their shorter, medium, and long-term interests in their property, and we found that about 90% of the respondents plan to live in their home full-time for the next 20 years. Of course, things change, but that's just a snapshot in time, kind of giving us a sense of the potential. Potential use of
They're optimistic because the average age is 65.
Well,
It's a good plan.
Well,
with healthcare, it can help.
That's
Their,
right.
their mean age is 50.
54, I know.
Median,
Yeah.
median.
I was going to the extreme, but yes.
So I've just got 2 slides left here. So if we move on to the next one, broadband, this is also listed as a regional priority in the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy and two different initiatives. Of course, looking at accessibility and affordable broadband is key. This is something also that's been raised as there's more remote work. We have developed a scope of work for a gap analysis so that could help us better target some of the future funding, addressing those needs initially. This is also an opportunity where the towns may want to make some of those localized decisions. So if there's the gap has been identified, some of the towns may want to work together more collaboratively to identify funding that they may want to put some of these strategies in place.
I'm sorry, Christy, who's doing the gap analysis?
Well, we have a scope of work prepared, but it hasn't been executed until there's appropriate funding.
Yeah.
Right. And then lastly, just kind of focusing a little bit on economic development, certainly supporting local businesses emerging from the pandemic. We've issued, in collaboration with the Chamber, 4 different business impact surveys throughout the course of the pandemic. And we know that our businesses are recovering, but certainly still need resources, and supporting local businesses, nonprofit organizations would be important here. High quality and affordable childcare. We are working right now to identify through a survey some of the needs of not only our families, but our providers as well, and looking at the region's workforce there, and then supporting and expanding labor and workforce opportunities. So a lot of this is on our website, but we also have our New Data Cape Cod site that contains a lot of the different data and resources to support this. So just wanted to kind of set the context a little bit in terms of where some of the regional priorities are that have been vetted fairly significantly already, just to kind of set the stage for some continued dialogue.
great. Thank you, Christy. Are there any questions for Christy? I'm sure we'll be hearing more from you throughout the process. I know you have a meeting at 3. So if you want to disappear,
You have 2 minutes.
we appreciate that. You do have 2 minutes.
should have you.
You're right on time.
I had my part switched to the end, so it's okay.
Great. Thank you. So now this is our initial sort of organization meeting, and now is a time for discussion, how we want to organize ourselves and move forward. Some initial thoughts, I think I want to be respectful of everybody's time and, keep this as condensed a process as necessary. So initially I was thinking sort of 5 meetings every 2 weeks, which would bring us to the middle of June. And I think we need to hear from the public and have public comment available. I would suggest after meeting 2 and 2024. If that sounds like a work plan that everybody is comfortable with and can commit to. Okay, good. You know, I think we do have a once in a generation at least opportunity here with the money. The money that's come into the county is of a size and scope that we've never seen before and may never see again. So I think we should be considering projects that are scaled larger than the kind of projects that we see, and maybe some of the kind of projects we would get through a portal process or through the letters that have been sent in. So how do we as a committee sort of can think about that? So one of the suggestions that I have is maybe we start with some of the regional challenges as sort of categories. And then we can take the ARPA mapping, which hopefully will, is that gonna be ready in 2 weeks?
We just got it on
Okay.
board.
He's signing the thing today.
Yeah.
So I think at our next meeting, we can think of those as categories. We may need an additional category or two. So I think we want to think about that.
Well, I think one of the filters needs to be how, like shovel-ready projects, right? If stuff has to be done within a couple of years, what does that mean? I mean, does that mean we can hire a housing coordinator for the county, but in 3 years, it becomes funded through normal budget processes?
We have done some of that work internally, like looking at different projects that kind of fit in or may fit in. So yes, we've been thinking about that. If we were going to go down that road, how would it be sustained long-term? But I agree with you. I mean, some of these things should be projects that can be, the money can be obligated and it can be completed. Or, there's some studies that we want to undertake.
Yeah, so there's an obligation deadline that money has to be obligated by December 2024.
Yeah.
And it has to be spent by,
26.
26, December 26th.
so we have to operate with those timelines in mind.
One thing that might be helpful too, it just, in that, we have engaged the 2 accounting firms that are working with us on the portal. So we have ARPA subject matter experts that we have on board that know the final rule in and out, and we can bring in and can be part of when it's appropriate, to give us the background on whether or not some of the conceptual ideas are even possible.
Right.
I mean, one of the things we've looked at, just to give you an example already, is with the septic loan program, which we've done an analysis and we want to, hopefully we'll be presenting to the commissioners next week on a final plan and a proposal, how to include sewer hookups in that and make them 0 or a sliding scale fee. One of the first questions I had to our experts, which is a CLA, so it's an accounting firm, is, so under the final rule, how does that work if we're giving out loans? And it's the devil is really in the detail of these things. So that kind of assistance in technical assistance is going to be very helpful.
And that'll be crucial. That's a great example, because if some of the money we want to invest in, say, trust funds or whatever, that would be sustainable long-term, that would be good for the region, but we want to make sure
We wanna make
that's
sure
an
it's
appropriate
right.
expenditure.
Right. And how much monitoring long-term we're going to have to do with those funds. So what, just playing out the whole septic loan, if we were to use some of that money for loans, the question I have is, what happens after 2026 with those loans? Can we just reinvest it? Or are we safer giving out grants to very low income folks if that needs sewer hookup? And then that's the way to obligate the funds and get it off our books. So that's just an example of the kind of expertise we can have people look at, questions like that and get really good answers.
So it might be good for the second meeting to have some of those experts available and for members of the committee to think about any questions you might want to ask them.
Okay.
I know, when federal money's given out in general, it does lose its designation as federal funds as it sort of comes to states as on the transportation side as a sub-grantee, for example. So I think that there's an established sort of framework for thinking about that, but it would be great to hear from those experts on that. Lisa?
At the start of the meeting and just really reading through, coming to today's meeting, that thread of populations disproportionately impacted by COVID feels to me, has to stay at the center of whatever matrix we use to start to sort of understand opportunity, size, scope, priority. So how ready is that data? And what kind of indicators will we be using to understand who those populations are?
And where they are.
Where they are, at what stage of,
Yeah.
impact or level of effectiveness they're at this moment.
That might be a useful, important role for our nonprofit sector to help with those, to help provide those mileposts.
Yeah, I do think it is an important thing that should be part of all of our considerations. If we do categorize them around challenges, we would have the opportunity to overlay ultimately the ARPA mapping on top of that to see which categories already have funding going to them. We'd also be able to take the information collected through the survey process for people that have submitted letters for specific roles and put those in categories. I think we'd also be able to categorize public comment that comes in and put those in categories. I think maybe the county departments have some suggestions. So if we can start to accumulate some of these very specific suggestions, we can categorize them. I think that gives us an opportunity to think about how we might link some of these together into larger projects. And then in every category, we should be asking the question, are disproportionate populations served? And so I think if we move through it that way,
Yeah, no,
we might be able to organize the process here. Dorothy?
Paul, this is such a thoughtful conversation in terms of, to Lisa's point, trying to actually understand impact. But some of that impact, the causality, was pre-existing. And so when you think about, for example, housing and the structural issues there, they were significantly exacerbated by COVID to the point, of crisis levels. So I guess, one of the things that my question will be is, does it, is the vision, does it have to be, monocular in terms of that time frame of COVID, or can it take into account the fact that there were vulnerable populations that were predisposed to being impacted by COVID? That's my first question. The second one is, and I think Beth, you answered it, which is relative to the actual allocation of the dollars within the timeframes that we're talking about in terms of obligating them. If, and I think you had given an example of a study, if it was possible, because you talked about sustainability afterwards, to have them obligated in a way where they created the framework for something that would attract sustainable funding for a critical issue, the obligation of it for the work on the framework and the study and all of that would in fact be an obligation of funds, right? So it wouldn't actually have to be that the project itself was delivered within that time frame, but that the funds laying the groundwork for that. And, I guess one of the things that was implicit in something that so it was a third point, so sorry, that I heard each of you say, and Beth, you really made this point, which is sustainability. And that is that as Paul said, this is a once in a generation opportunity to really move the needle on some critical underlying issues, all of which were exacerbated by COVID. So it does seem like one of the criteria that I keep hearing inherent in what each of you are saying is kind of not blowing it all at once and then having it stop, but providing meaningful long-term change. So those are just three reactions and questions that I have.
Thank you, Dorothy. That's a great point. And I think as we are going through the subject matters here and looking at things, we have to develop criteria for the commissioners. And so those criteria would be, is it promoting a sustainable program or initiative? Does it leverage additional money? And so I think those are exactly the kind of criteria we want to think about that we'll have to enumerate in our final report. Dan?
We're spending too much time together, Dorothy, because what she said was exactly what the 3 points she made were, incubator or seed money versus a one-time spend is really, is really the critical thing. The other thing is how wide is the parameter of COVID impacted population? So when housing costs go up 40% in an 18-month period, one would argue anybody without a place to live is part of that impacted group.
Yeah.
So it's.
I agree, and I think part of what we'll have to do is take a look, because there are a lot of the disproportionately impacted populations, there were pre-existing problems. Housing is one of them. But when, within a course of 18 months, your inventory of housing under $500,000 falls 97%. That probably rises to the level of a particular COVID-19 impact that is definitely impacting disproportionately certain populations. And if you look at the sort of migration in and the purchase of second homes as primary homes, and the number of people that are being displaced from year-round rentals because of that, also, I think COVID-19. So I think there's a degree to which some of these problems that were pre-existing have been impacted by COVID-19 enough that it probably calls a specific response.
Well, my question is kind of a leading question, which is, I don't think we have all the data, right? Like, I don't think we quite know how vast the population is that's been affected in different ways. So I agree. I mean, I think you can assume that populations that were in a vulnerable state prior to COVID, things got worse. But I don't think I haven't found really current data that's been able to sum up in a meaningful way at a county or town level specific, other than using health data, right? Literal health data.
Yeah, I agree. And Chrissy's presentation was sort of an overview. There's a lot to drill down on in there. The 4 business surveys that we did, the new homeowner survey, a lot of data in there that I think will be useful to the group as a whole to see if some of these particular issues that we're looking at are directly related to COVID-19, at least in their severity. Here.
I will say that the final rule from the Treasury and legislation goes a long way to stipulating some of these well-acknowledged deficiencies in impacted communities already. We don't have to develop all of that.
That's what
Yeah, a lot of it's stipulated.
Yeah, I think we'll find when we get into it also that some of the disproportionately impacted populations, some of the pre-existing problems there are nonprofits that are serving those groups currently in a regional way.
Yeah.
So I think there'll be a nice connection to what we're talking about.
Right, I'm a little nervous that the data, if it's not, that survey data isn't available for a month from now, that I think it's likely to impact the priorities.
Which survey data?
The ARPA
The
mapping.
ARPA
data.
map.
Oh, the ARPA mapping? Well, it'll come as fast as our colleague, our brand new colleague can do it. And we'll have him and his associate at the next meeting.
That's a great
Talk
point,
to him.
Karen. But I think in looking at it categorically, I think what we might do is make connections between existing projects out there that could survive even this process, because even though 42 million is a lot for whatever subsection that we're going to have to allocate to regional projects, it's not infinite, right? And so some of these things can be moved off, but I think it does help kind of structure regional priorities for the county, for the commission, to look at other opportunities to connect some of these programs and look for additional funding sources.
Absolutely.
I would also suggest we have a filter that talks about how we're increasing our own resiliency for the next public health issue, right? I mean, we think we're coming out of COVID when we really don't know. So just in terms of keeping that top of mind rather than saying, oh, well, that's some rearview mirror, right? I mean, I'm just assuming the federal government will continue to support vaccinating people for the next flavor.
Until it falls off.
Right,
Right.
so I don't know, I just think that there's, what else can we do?
So building that capacity for the ongoing public health response is, I think,
Because that was not fun,
no. it-
working on that. I'm just saying,
You did a great job.
was it, the
So-
playbook's kind of written, but still, like, you need to have resources to do that.
Yeah, but the emergency situation you were thrown into and the region was thrown into and how the region coalesced around that, I think is a model and framework to maybe build something in the future as part of the public health category. Yeah.
Yeah, at the risk of having an Admiral Stockdale moment here. I do think there's a who are we and why are we here? This is a group of people that are really engaged and have a lot to offer. But the county hasn't even decided yet whether they're gonna distribute all this out to the towns. And I think, if we're gonna be really engaged in this process, I think we need to hear from the assembly that we're gonna not be just a check your box exercise.
Yes.
And I have been involved in enough of these, the latest of which was hiring a new town administrator in Harwich, where we literally spent a year interviewing and going through this incredible process with a guarantee at the beginning that it wasn't just to check your box to take the acting administrator, which ended up happening. And I was really aggravated. This is a public meeting. I don't even mind saying that publicly, because we put a lot of time and effort into something that was a foregone conclusion. If this is going to be a foregone conclusion, we will be really frustrated that we were engaged. Now, I don't know what it means to get something from the county, but I do think if we're going to be engaged at the level they're asking us to be, we need to understand how we're going to play into the process, other than just the loose word of advisory. I know they can't make a commitment, but on the other hand,
Well, I think it's a great point. I think that, the county charter is somewhat,
Flexible.
it's not an elegant document, let's put it that way.
we're trying to address that.
So there's been, but the back and forth between the assembly and the commissioners, for example, has already stalled the process of discussing regional projects for long enough. And part of my concern up there watching that debate is that the assembly members don't have these regional projects organized and proposed in a way where they can really evaluate whether spending it regionally is better than giving it back to the towns. So I think our work is important, although no guarantees. But I also would report back that I think there's been a lot of progress in the last couple of weeks in trying to get some consensus between the assembly delegates and the commissioners about how to move forward on this. And my hope is that within 2 weeks, there'll be a specific ordinance to discuss that identifies what percentage of these funds are going to go back to the towns and which are going to be available for a region.
So it is possible that there will be a commitment that X percentage of these funds will be spent on regional initiatives or
Yeah.
projects.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
what
that's-
we're working
that's-
towards.
I
That's
mean,
what we have been
okay.
working
We've
towards.
been fighting very hard for, yes.
I mean, if that commitment isn't made, I really think we have to evaluate what we're doing.
That's totally fair. I mean, I
Yeah.
totally agree with
Okay.
you. Yeah.
I'm not saying we should take a vote on that, but I am saying that that should at least be in the ether as part of the discussion.
Yes, but I think the work that we do, even as we start to move through the process,
We'll help.
we should enhance the likelihood that we can get to that.
Okay.
So it is a circular argument in some respect, but I hear.
It's
you.
not a leap of faith, it's a slog of faith.
That's good.
Oh, ye of little faith.
No, this is,
Have faith.
trust and verify, which we don't actually do that these days,
Oh,
but I mean,
Yeah,
it's,
well, understood. There's a commitment, I think, from a lot of people at the table who have been actively engaged in trying to broker those discussions to continue. So we'll report back on any progress that's been made as
Paul,
we go through the process.
we have a question from Sean.
Hi, Sean. You're on mute again, Sean.
Sorry. So my question has a little bit more to do with kind of the logistics of moving forward in terms of as we weigh these various issues or what have you, like obviously like broadband is an area that I'm extremely familiar with, and the organization I work for, we advise the Treasury Department on the final rules as it relates to broadband and on the spending, White House, Senate staffers, et cetera, on the infrastructure bill. But my question has to do with, as we work together as a team, are we like, we're not like breaking off into like little subgroups in terms of each sort of subject matter expert area type of thing, I would assume. And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to kind of how, you foresee, the input on various, issues as on these things as we move forward. I guess I'm not being very articulate, but that's.
You're always articulate. Good question. And I think one of the reasons that the committee was kept as small, really, as it is so that we would all be engaged on every issue and that it wouldn't splinter off. And I think that's probably the best way to move forward. If we can agree on categories, then we could set up certain categories that are going to be discussed at a particular meeting and associate public comment with those particular categories, give notice. And I think that would be a good way to proceed. Always leaving the ability to pivot if things change and we think we need to go in a different direction. But we are going to start with a lot of questions about what data is out there, what data is available. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity, but it's big, so it's hard to digest. And I don't think we're expected to get down into the details, but to make broad recommendations about prioritizing certain categories and then provide back to the commissioners information and data that they can make more specific decisions on about the process.
Right. And then my only other thing, just real quick, is on even more granular in terms of the meeting schedule. And I think I was already told that each one of these, there's sort of a Zoom option. And the only reason why I asked that is because I've got a couple of commitments to speaking, like out in Colorado and in Nashville in May and in June, and want to make sure that I'm available.
Yeah, welcome to the new world. So the hybrid option is available. We've got this cool little owl thing that I think facilitates some of that. And I think we've got a good mix of this today. We have 3 people remote and everyone else is in the room. And I think there'll be a mix of that as we go forward. Dan.
I was just waving at the apple.
Dan was waving at the apple.
Stay on
Note that in the
Thursdays at 2:00. Is this a good time for everybody, or will that be some exchange?
2 weeks from today.
Yeah, well, what about a meeting time? I heard some negative comments from Wendy on Thursdays.
I'm doing a really bad job of being tired. That's my problem.
Yeah, really.
Are you retired?
No.
Yeah. I mean, this is not a good time for me, but because our town hall starts in 8 minutes, but
Okay.
if it's good for everybody else, we'll make it work.
What we'll do is we'll send out a doodle poll
Yeah.
or something to that effect
Yeah,
to get
good.
the time for everybody to encourage as much participation as possible. And I want to also mention that a member of the assembly will join us at the next meeting. And they will be on the committee.
Is that rotating or is that going to be?
It's going to be one person.
So my question earlier was that kind of related to like what we can recommend, how specific can we get? You don't have to answer it now, but that's a question I have, rather than buckets. Can we, a good example would be the sewer hookups. Is it a loan program? Is it a grant? I mean, can we get that specific?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think when we put the specifics in the bucket, that's a great example. So I think we look at the septic loan program. Can we make it a trust program? Can we make it a sewer hookup offset program? Does it make sense to sort of put that next to the water protection trust fund? How does that relate to the county lab and the test facility at the base? So that's how I see some of these initiatives growing and becoming sort of transformational and knitting them together.
Getting them together.
Yeah. But so it will be specific.
Okay.
You like playing with Legos? Be good. Okay,
Poll for the next
so,
meeting.
yeah, we'll have a poll for the next meeting. So is there any other input today? Anyone?
On the phone, Kristen, did you have any particular questions? Taking it all in?
No, just yes, taking it all in, learning, excited to be here. I'm sorry I'm not in person. I have a sick child at home, so I apologize.
So, and I don't see this as sort of a sporadic sort of commitment, at least as it relates to information. So it won't be that you just get information to discuss every time we meet. We'll be feeding you information in the intervening period and hopefully encouraging feedback from you, at least by email. I do have a question about, is the county going to support our work on the website anywhere where we might be able to take in information or post some of the presentations that we're giving here? Okay. That'll be good. It's good.
All right.
Please make sure to email any questions that come up and information requests that you have.
Yeah.
To me, whenever.
Okay, great.
Well, I just want to say I'm really grateful to be able to participate in this. And I think, through you to the commissioners or whoever, thanking them for, because this is a real privilege.
Thank you.
And we will serve as dutifully as we can.
Ditto.
And I certainly pass
Indeed.
that on, but I really appreciate all of your and everyone's enthusiasm and the tough questions too. I think that what you asked about the commitment from the county, hopefully after the 20th, we'll have a better idea.
Great.
So,
Yeah.
very,
My final comment, it goes to that too. I think a lot of what's happened on the county level is sort of structural in nature because the county is structured in a way that facilitates really poor communication, among the governmental bodies and between them. And so I think using a group like this actually facilitates fact-based decision-making and builds the kind of trust. I think we can help facilitate that on a county level. So I'm hopeful that that's where we wind up.
Thank you for sharing.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank everyone for your
Thank
attendance.
you.
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to
Bye.
see you. I need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Second, we're done.
Aye.
That's a sewer question. Some of the towns